Hello, I'm Dr. Jeethan Bendoor. I gave a presentation recently to my colleagues via a webinar. The presentation is titled Protein Prescription of a Physician's Perspective. I am re-recording that session with the same slides in order to make this short and so that I can present this on a video link for a larger audience. So here goes. Protein Prescription, a Physician's Perspective. This talk is independent, it's not sponsored. There are a few things that become a challenge when it comes to nutrition or even prescribing nutrition, especially religion and politics, which come in the way of what people eat and how they eat and when they eat. Now, eating has also become a very ethical act because it really depends on where you work and what you can eat. As well, just three macronutrients, talking about them puts us into a tailspin. These three macronutrients being carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. We don't get very much into the micronutrients aspect of it, where we have plenty of micronutrients to talk about, and we'll discuss that sometime soon. So in the early 90s, we had a food pyramid which was prescribed to us by food bodies, and later that was modified around 2005, which is also a pyramid and equally confusing, which really doesn't make sense when you look at food and what we know about nutrition these days. The pyramid has now become a plate, and this is as confusing to me, and even trying to explain what it means to patients is quite a challenge. I think one of the worst advices I can give my patients is to ask them to have a balanced diet or a balanced meal, and it doesn't really make sense because it's very difficult to tell people what a balanced meal is for them unless we know the metabolism very well, because food and meals or nutrition has to be individualized. So let's focus on a very important macronutrient, protein, my favorite. So what's a protein? A protein is made up of amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of a protein. Amino acids are linked to each other by peptide bonds. When two amino acids come together, they're called dipeptides, three tripeptides, and so on, polypeptides. So the amino acid sequences are different, and different sequences of amino acids make up different proteins. So there are quite a few amino acids, of which 9 are called essential because the body doesn't make it and we have to provide the body with these amino acids via food. So the basic structure is something like this. An amino acid has an amino group, an acid group, and a side group. And this side group is variable, which makes one amino acid different from another. So here are the amino acids, the essential amino acids, the non-essential, and the special amino acids. As I mentioned some time back, the essential amino acids are those that have to be replenished via food. The body cannot make them on their own. The non-essentials are those that the body can make on demand, and the special amino acids are also ones which have to be, some can be made by the body but have to be also replenished. One of the interesting amino acids there is taurine, which is quite an abundant amino acid in our body, but not many people have sufficient amounts of taurine. The protein that we eat gets digested and broken down into amino acids. These amino acids are then absorbed into the blood and they form an amino acid pool. And from this amino acid pool, which is very important to have, the amino acids are then absorbed into tissue or utilized by tissue to make up structures or of tissue. And one of the most important of them all being muscle, which we'll talk about in a minute. So how much protein do we need in a non-diseased or challenged state? So how much protein should one have? The Indian Council of Medical Research, the ICMR, recommends that an adult Indian requires or needs 1 gram of protein per kg per day. That means if a person is 70 kgs, he or she requires 70 grams of protein a day. Now I want to be very clear that this is the recommended dietary allowance, which means that it is, in my opinion, the minimal dietary allowance. It is not the maximum. So when they say 1 gram per kg body weight per day, it doesn't mean that if you go to 1.5 or 2 grams per kg body weight, it is bad for you. It is just that the minimal is 1 gram per kg body weight. What's also important to understand is that When I mean 1 gram per kg body weight is minimal, that means it is regardless of exercise. So when patients tell me that I have not eaten protein yesterday, because I did not exercise, it doesn't really make much sense, because the basic requirement regardless of exercise is 1 gram per kg body weight per day. Now that's 1 gram per kg body weight for an average person. What about other circumstances? Now, children will need at least 1.4 grams per kg body weight at an earlier age, and that tapers down to about 1.05 grams per kg body weight of protein per day. One of the biggest challenges that I have are senior citizens, not 70 years, even lower than that, 60 years of age, who need about 1 to 1.3 grams of protein per kg body weight per day to optimize physical function. That is really a huge problem, because even a regular people don't take 1.0 to 1.3 grams of protein per day, and to recommend that kind of protein intake for older people is a challenge. So we have to understand the situation and explain to our elderly patients that they need to have more protein than they had when they were younger. So, other circumstances like illness and convalescence, the protein requirement increases again in these circumstances by at least about 15% in acute infections and 30% in chronic infections. And that has to be explained as well to patients who are ill with infections. What about athletes, body sculptors, and persons who want to bulk up muscle mass? They need high protein of up to 3 grams of protein per kg body weight per day. Now one has to remember that the requirement here is higher, and it is not a problem as long as the kidney functions and metabolic processes are fine. There is no evidence that shows that high protein up to about 3 grams of protein per kg body weight per day hurts the kidney. What about women during pregnancy and lactation? The NIN, the National Institute of Nutrition in Hyderabad, keeping a reference woman at 55 kg, recommends that during pregnancy, a woman needs 1.41 grams of protein per kg body weight per day. And that changes to 1.34 grams of protein during lactation in the first 6 months, and 1.23 grams of protein per kg body weight per day, 6 months to 12 months of lactation. What about protein intake in a diseased state? Type 2 diabetes mellitus, a condition that we are all very familiar with. The American Diabetes Association, the Canadian Diabetes Association, as well as the Joslin Institute all recommend nothing less than 0.8 grams of protein per kg body weight per day. Even patients with cirrhosis of the liver need 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kg body weight per day. Patients who have undergone surgeries also require high protein. Now we know that patients who have had major burns do very well when given high proteins during the healing process, especially eggs during the healing process. Okay, so we know what the requirements for protein are. So what is the problem, really? The challenge, according to me, lies within us, because I believe that we Indians, generally speaking, are extremely protein intake shy. So here's a clipping from a newspaper published in 2015, which says that 80% Indian diets are protein deficient. This was a survey done around that time. What was also published around that time, that is 2015, is that 9 of 10 Indians lack adequate protein. Mumbaikars score high. So it's not just me rattling off that we do not take enough proteins. 9 of 10 people have a protein deficient diet. This is published scientific data. And protein intake is less than 50% of RDA. Let me remind you all again that the RDA set up for Indians an average Indian is 1 gram per kg body weight per day. And according to me, that is the minimal requirement per day. Now, a lot of us are also deficient in micronutrients, and these micronutrients are extremely important. And I'll get to the micronutrients in another presentation. Okay, so here are representations of an Indian meal and a Western meal. On an average, an Indian meal is supposed to have about 10% protein, Western meal 15% protein. But what is striking is that, at least in this representation, the Indian meal here represented by a thali has a lot more food to eat to get that 10% of protein. And you cannot eat a lot more of this. Whereas with a Western diet, say a steak, and in this photograph a potato, you can eat a lot more steak. But you cannot do that with the Indian diet, because by the time you finish the thali, you're absolutely filled up. So I love my thalis, and so I ask when I order one, I make sure that I have lesser amount of the rice or the chapatis or puris or whatever we order, but I make sure that that quantity is low so that we can eat a lot more that food that's served in a vati, be it a vegetarian meal or a non-vegetarian meal. Now, everything that comes in a vati is actually brilliant, if cooked well, of course, and without the kheer. The idea of displaying this slide is to emphasize the fact that we have as many non-vegetarians as we have lacto-vegetarians in India. But I have a challenge with my non-vegetarian patients, because most of them have a meat or fish twice a week, or probably even less than that. And they are under the impression that they are eating or consuming non-vegetarian, so they should be getting enough proteins. But that really doesn't happen, because having it occasionally doesn't mean that you're getting a lot of meat, because even if someone has a piece or two of chicken, that is not a lot of protein. Published data also points to the fact that protein intake has reduced over time in India. We also seem to have a challenge when it comes to quality of proteins that we consume in India. The proteins generally seem to have low digestibility, low bioavailability, as well as a challenge when it comes to the amino acid composition. A typical example would be cereals that we have that lack certain amino acids. Now, digestion is pretty complex, isn't it? So you can get the best quality proteins, but if digestion is not proper, then you're not going to have good, breaking down of proteins and good absorption. So one has to look at the right pH in the gastric chamber, the right amount of enzymes, the right absorptive surfaces, and all these again add so many spins and googlies into this whole process of getting good quality protein and having them digested so that they can be absorbed into the bloodstream. Okay, so the proteins are now digested. They get absorbed as dipeptides or singular amino acids. They go into an amino acid pool. Now the body can use these amino acids to create various kinds of enzymes or tissue. One of the most important organs that we have, for which proteins are really very, very important, is an organ called muscle. Now we expect muscle just to be something that we can use for locomotion, for movement, lift things and things like that. But the muscle is a lot more than that. We have to look at muscle as a multifaceted organ. Muscle is a brilliant paracrine and endocrine organ. It is involved in crosstalk between skeletal muscle and adipose tissue. It is an immunogenic organ. It also influences a lot of metabolic challenges that we face. So low muscle mass becomes an issue even with a simple thing like obesity. Unfortunately, this beautiful organ called skeletal muscle, a multifaceted organ, starts having a challenge as we age. The muscle mass drops as we grow older, and we see a proportionate rise in fat as well as non-muscle free fat mass. And that's when all the challenges really take a peak. So in my opinion, this starts with insufficient protein intake and insufficient activity that causes muscle depletion, both in muscle mass as well as muscle strength. We have to understand that these are two different things. If you see a lean person lifting a huge rock or something heavy, that's muscle strength. It really doesn't need to have muscle mass. So these two have to go in parallel, and we have to make sure that people develop both muscle mass as well as muscle strength. Muscle loss or muscle wasting also causes challenges with conditions like cirrhosis and many other chronic or even acute conditions. We know that mortality increases in cases of cirrhosis when muscle mass drops. An important point about sarcopenia. Sarcopenia was earlier defined as low muscle mass in the elderly, but we are seeing that in the young. We start off with poor protein intake, poor activity, our muscle mass is low, our muscle strength is bad, and this continues to get even worse. And while this is happening in the background, we are obsessed with fat. It's about fat or unfat. It's about high fat, low fat. How do we get fat and how do we get unfat? Now, this particular slide is from a presentation by Jamie Scott, and it really makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to sarcopenia, we seem to be heading in two directions. One, the typical sarcopenia, which has low to maybe a little bit of normal BMI, but definitely low muscle mass and bone mass, and who are metabolically unhealthy. And in the other direction, we have sarcopenic obesity, where the muscle to fat ratio is totally skewed up. And these people have high BMI, they have, of course, low muscle mass and bone mass, and who are also metabolically unhealthy. And the commonality of these two, sets of people are they have muscle loss, bone mineral loss, excess visceral fat, reduced fitness, insulin resistance, high cardiovascular disease risk, and high cancer risk. Enough of muscle. I'll talk about muscle in another presentation. Let's get back to proteins. So where do I get my proteins from? And what does 1 gram per kg body weight mean? So let's look at a common sources of protein in our country. So here's a list of pulses and legumes that we consume in our country commonly for protein. So if you look at, I've highlighted 3 columns. The serving size in this case 100 grams, the amount of carbohydrates they contain, and the amount of protein they contain. So if you look at Bengal gram, it contains 20.8 grams of protein in 100 grams. And if you look at chickpea, 17.1 grams of protein in 100 grams, that's 17.1%. And my favorite rajma has 22.9% protein. But what we also have to look at is the amount of carbohydrates they give you. So 100 grams of Bengal gram will give you 20.8 grams of protein, but it will give you 59.8 grams of carbohydrates. And Rajma, that gives you 22.9 grams of protein, will give you 60.6 grams of carbohydrates. That is quite bulky. So what happens is when you cook 100 grams, this is again 100 grams of uncooked of these pulses and legumes. So when you cook them, they will swell up and they become almost 3 times their size. So to consume, to actually get, say for example in Bengal gram, to get a 20.8 grams of protein, you have to consume 100 grams of that dal uncooked, but when cooked becomes about 200 to maybe about 300 grams of cooked material. That is a lot to consume. And so it is important to understand that you have to consume these pulses and legumes in a larger quantity to get the right amount of protein, or the protein that you are measuring to get into your system. What about the non-vegetarian side? So if you look at here, let's look at Mumbai's favorite Bombay duck. 100 grams of Bombay duck gives you 61 grams of protein, 61.7 grams of protein. And look at the carbohydrate column, 2.5 grams of carbohydrate. Now let's look at another commonly consumed fowl, which is chicken. 100 grams of chicken will give you almost 26 grams of protein and hardly any carbohydrates. So this is huge difference between, say, pulses and legumes, which you commonly consume, and the non-vegetarian meals that we do not as commonly consume. Because even if you ask a non-vegetarian patient as to how many times they have consumed non-vegetarian food, they would say about 2 to 3 times a week, and each serving would be 2 to 3 pieces of chicken. So if you look at really how much protein they're eating, it's not really much. Now we don't have dal and pulses and chicken on their own. We have them with a roti made up of bajra or jowar or corn or ragi, which is nachni, or maybe even rice. Now they add to the carbohydrate pool that we in the food, and add bulk as well. So this becomes a challenge because we seem to be having a lot more carbohydrates than protein in our meals, even though these contain a little bit of protein. Fortunately, we are lacto-vegetarians, which means that we consume milk products. So luckily, these can add some more, protein to our meals. But you have to remember that we need to have quite a bit of these as well to increase the protein intake. For example, if you look at a glass of milk, that's 200 ml of pure milk, you get about 7 to 8 grams of protein. So it's very important to make sure that you get pure milk. Here's looking at what we do with the flour. If you have a bajra chapati, it's heavy. That gives you about 6.2 grams of protein. This is a Times of India publication, July 2018, and it drives in the same point that I've been trying to make. Dals, which is a favorite for both vegetarians and non-vegetarians, have proteins, but you got to really know how much protein you're getting out of cooked dal. It therefore becomes imperative that we quantitate the amount of protein in our serving, the amount of carbs that protein or those proteins come with, how the food is cooked, because that can add to the bulk, and to understand that lentils are not complete proteins for humans, and we have to mix it along with cereals, for example with rice, to make it a complete protein. A perfect example is dal khichdi. It's also important to understand the measures, because we should understand how much 1 teaspoon is, or a tablespoon, or a cup, or a wati, and those measures should be kept standard. So for a person weighing 80 kgs, and to achieve 1 gram of protein per kg body weight, so that's 80 grams of protein per day, he has to have, if vegetarian, sprouts 100 grams, paneer 200 grams, dal 100 grams, jowar, nachni or ragi roti 100 grams, or rice 150 grams, vegetables 2 helpings. Vegetables do not have that much protein, but it's good for micronutrients as well as fiber. And if one is a non-vegetarian, 2 eggs, 200 grams of chicken, or about 250 grams of fish or mutton. Vegetables, again, 2 helpings, approximately 5 grams of proteins there. And the nachni, jowar, bajra, roti or rice. So that's quite a tall order if you really look at it. And this is regardless of exercise. The best way to get proteins is via natural food. Absolutely no doubt about it. So that would encompass fish, seafood, eggs, dals, paneer, cereals, in combinations, of course. And very rarely do I, prescribe soya. Pretty much never, actually, because I do not like the phytoestrogens they have. For patients who cannot achieve the required protein intake per day, supplements are certainly required, and supplements available in different forms. It could be a milk protein, which is usually whey or casein. They can come in combinations with branch chain amino acids like leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Leucine is very important for stimulating muscle growth, because leucine is a signal. Enough leucine is a signal for the body to make muscle. We also get protein supplements that have egg or meat supplements, which are very, very uncommon in India. Now, these supplements are important. The biggest challenge is most people think that these supplements are meant for people who are, body sculpting or building their bodies, or for athletes, which is really not true. It is meant for every person who cannot achieve the amount of protein that they're supposed to have per day. So please do not feel shy to prescribe proteins as a supplement. The protein supplements that you get in the market are standardized. Typically, a scoop that is provided in a box of protein gives you 24 grams of protein. Usually, a scoop is about 32 grams, depending which company makes it. But that scoop will give you 24 grams of protein. A note of caution: because protein is popular, especially in the fitness industry and the body sculpting industry, proteins are becoming a challenge because there are a lot of duplicates in the market. So one has to take care when it comes to sourcing these supplemental proteins. We sometimes loosely use these words higher and high protein. So we need to be clear when we use these words. Higher than what? Higher than RDA? Higher than 1.2 grams? So it has to be defined. Secondly, when we use the word high, in my opinion and my definition, high protein is above 1.5 grams of protein per kg body weight per day. Now, some people need high protein. For example, athletes, body sculptors, and persons who want to bulk up their muscle mass. And there is no published evidence that shows that taking high proteins of even up to 2.8 grams of protein per kg body weight produces any adverse events, especially on the kidney. Now, as long as the kidney is functioning properly, as long as your metabolism is good, and as long as you need that much protein, this should not be a problem. So consuming 1 gram of protein per kg body weight per day is not a challenge for normal people with normal kidney functions. And answer sessions.
Protein powder you talked about,
Yeah.
You're totally vegetarian. I mean,
Yeah.
no egg, no BN, whatever, brand.
The vegan protein.
First brand you said, that black color box, black color double.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah, it is Oziva. That the one I showed was Oziva.
First one, yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't have egg.
No. Vegan proteins, the plant proteins don't have egg. They don't have egg, they don't have milk. So it's meant for vegans, because the difference between vegans and lacto-vegetarians, which most Indians are, is that lacto-vegetarians have milk products, or some vegetarians have eggs, but most of us are lacto-vegetarians. But vegans are ones who don't even have any meat products. They don't even wear leather belt or leather shoes or anything that has to do with animals. So that is more of an ethical choice, whereas lacto-vegetarians are more of a religious choice. So the answer to your question, Doc, that is pure vegetarian protein, that's pure vegan protein, which doesn't have milk or egg or anything.
Sir, good evening. I'm Dr. Hemadi.
Yes, Doc.
Yeah, there is something called creatine powder is available in the market.
Yes.
Is it good?
Yes, it does. It enhances the building of muscles. So because muscles can be, we can use things like BCA and creatinine. Creatine is used for muscle build. It enhances the muscle, what you call as remodeling of the muscle. So creatinine, yes, it does help.
Doctor, somebody has asked GNC powder website,
Okay, sure. Yeah, sir, Doc, if you go on to just Google it, GNC India, you will get the website. It's very easy to get. But if you can email me or WhatsApp me on the same number, I will definitely give you all the information you need. You know what? I don't work for GNC. I wish I did, because I send all my patients to GNC. There are other good proteins. It's just that there are a lot of duplicates in the market.
Does creatine have any side effect on the kidneys? Creatine in the powder?
No, sir. Depending on how much, again, creatine you're taking and how good your kidneys are. For most people who have good kidney functions, so most of the patients, I look at the kidneys, I look at the creatinine, I look at the blood, urea, blood uric acid. So uric acid is not a measure of amino acids or protein breakdown. Urea is an end product of protein breakdown. So that is important to differentiate. And I check the ureas, I check the creatinine as well. Most of the times, if it's all fine,
The powder which you have suggested contains leucine, taurine, and the amino acids which you have been mentioning.
So
TMC powder.
yes, sir. So generally, you see, all proteins, whether you get proteins from dal or whether you get proteins from rice or whether you get proteins from eggs or meat, all of them have a variation in amino acids. That is the basic difference between one protein and another. So why is one protein better than the other? That's a huge debate, and I don't think we have the time to talk about it. It's the amino acid constituents. So whatever suits us as human beings is the amino acid constituents. So there's a big debate on non-vegetarian is better than vegetarian or not. I mean, let's not get into that here, but we can debate it on another platform sometime. So all these products have good proteins. And some of the products have BCAAs or branch chain amino acids. They're leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And leucine is one of the most important of them. So you need at least 2.5 grams of leucine to stimulate muscle growth, especially for people who are 40, 45 plus.
Sir, how many treptin biscuit one should take regularly?
So one treptin, it's called a diskette. One treptin diskette gives you 1.5 grams of protein.
Oh, hardly anything. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. But it's a good space filler. I mean, protein is not that easy to find, sir. That's why it's a huge challenge. And this is my hypothesis. Because we are protein shy, our muscle mass is on the lower side. And our elderlies, not even elderly, I'm 55, people of my age, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, have got low muscle mass. And a typical example is my mother, trying to tell her I have to have more protein. She says, in my Tulu language, she says, Dayat protein means why so much protein? And it's very hard to convince people that they need protein because they need muscle. Because our largest consumer after the brain of carbohydrates and glucose, especially glucose, is muscle. So if you have low muscle mass, your insulin resistance goes up. We don't have any place to tuck in all the extra carbohydrates, and we are insulin resistant, and our diabetes shoots up. That's the end of this whole story. So my hypothesis is that because we are extremely protein shy and because we don't have enough muscle mass, we are pretty prone to, I'm not saying that we're not genetically prone, but we are pretty prone to diabetes and all the metabolic challenges.
Chat box.
Sorry, sir?
There is a long question on the chat box. Dr. Saina, you can unmute and ask, please.
Dr. Saina?
Yeah, so I wanted to know the difference between whey protein isolate and concentrate.
Okay.
And also one more thing, that most of the protein powders, they say they are sugar free, but they have sucralose in it. So what's your take on sucralose also?
Sucralose is one of the better sweeteners, Doc. Not my favorite, but it's still an okay sweetener. It doesn't spike insulin or increase glucose, but my only issue with sucralose is it can cause a bit of a gut flora challenge. But on the whole, it's not a bad sweetener. But the challenge, Doc, is that people need some kind of flavor. So in my last company that I worked for, I wanted to bring in an amino acid complex so that it could become vegan and everybody could use it. I didn't want it to have any flavor because I wanted it to be pure amino acids so that people can drink it or put powder on. But Doc, it tastes awful. You just cannot have it. So you have to put in some kind of taste busters or sweeteners, otherwise people will not take it. So I answered your question. Sucralose is not a bad sweetener. I wish we had protein shakes without the sweeteners like sucralose. Now, the difference between protein isolate, protein concentrate, and protein, there's one more. So protein concentrate, so all whey protein is basically there are three types. One is concentrate, that's basically just taking whey protein and making it and dehydrating it. So it has the protein, it has the fat and everything in it. And good fat, we need fat for it to get absorbed actually. And then we have protein isolate. Protein isolate is where they've removed most of the carbohydrates. Okay, it's a purer form of protein. So if you look at the percentage of protein in protein isolate powders, they have a high percentage of protein of amino acids of protein in it. So protein isolate is a pure form of protein concentrate, and protein hydroxylate or this hydroxylated protein, which is basically digested protein, is most of the times it is isolated protein, but it is pre-digested so that the absorption gets better. In some of the products, they put digestive enzymes as well to improve digestion. Does that answer your question, Doc?
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Sir, anyone else to want to ask? What would be a good way to increase muscle mass for older people?
The bottom line is protein, ma'am. And exercise.
Exercise, sir. Which
exercise? Okay. Okay. Now, for muscle build, it's almost always resistance-based exercise. Almost always. Okay. In my book of exercises, walk is not an exercise. वो हवा खाने के लिए अच्छा है. But for initially, we can start with walks, and slowly increase that, and encourage our patients to do resistance training, like bands or a little bit of weight, 1 kg weight or 2 kg weights. These are very important, especially for large muscles, because they are the muscles that will take you a long way and long distance. So unfortunately, the fitness industry is geared more towards the younger group than the older group. There are none of fitness centers which really look into the 50 plus. So in fact, some time back, I wanted to start a place called Muscle 40 plus, because we don't have people who encourage older people and to do exercise. So yes, the answer to your question is resistance based, weight-based exercise, which is the best, which has to be monitored, of course, so that they don't hurt their tendons or their joints. Then there is another way of enhancing muscle growth or muscle. It's called as blood flow restrictions, or BFR. So if you can Google a doctor called Dr. Katsu. He's a Japanese doctor who came up with something called the Katsu technique, where what people do is they put a band. Say if you want to improve the muscle in your biceps, you put a resistant band around the muscle, and that pressure on that is again varies, and there is a scale or a chart of how much pressure you can put on a band that is a pneumatic band, and that causes a pressure on the muscle. So when you flex your muscle once, it is equivalent to almost 4 to 5 times of normal flexing. So that helps people of old age as well. And that was used initially for people post cardiac surgery to improve muscle mass, because improving muscle mass in pretty much every post surgery condition helps a lot.
Thank you, sir.
So ma'am, protein and exercise, there's no way out. And exercise really the central point. So the type of exercise is very important.
Something about digestive enzymes. Some question has been asked in the chat box.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see the chat
What
box.
do you prescribe?
Okay. Now to improve, I have not shown the paper, but to improve digestion, protein digestion, as well as a little bit of fat, because most natural proteins come with fat, is to use digestive enzymes. My go-to enzyme is uni enzyme, which is made by Torrent, or papidazyme, which is made by the company that not sponsored this talk, but gave me a link, and I'm medical advisor for them. But that protein, they have a papidazyme, which is actually quite good, or sometimes pancrease. Now these are the 3 proteins that I prescribe, and depending on the type of protein and the amount of protein one eats, the amount of digestive enzyme one needs or requires will vary. Let me give you my example. I'm 55 years old. If my first meal of the day is 2 plates of keema, chicken keema, that will be about 200 grams of chicken keema, and that's about 48 grams of protein and hardly any carbohydrates. Now I cannot digest that much of chicken at this age, and so what I do is I take uni enzymes to start off with. I tried 1 uni enzyme, didn't make a difference. 2, I was still feeling a little uncomfortable. 3 helped me. So I take at least 4 to 5 uni enzymes every time I have a lot of protein. So some patients I combine uni enzyme with papidazyme, or uni enzyme with pancrease, or papidazyme or pancrease, and there are some other digestive enzymes like bestozyme that can be used as well. Does that answer your question, Doc?
Yes.
Yes. So that enzymes are, in my opinion, essential, because the minute you give high protein diet, see, I'll tell you one of the other reasons why digestive enzymes are important. Most of our patients have acidity or they have gas. And so when they have acidity, we go to medications, of course, liquid like an antacid, liquid antacid like Gelusil or Mucane or whatever. And then we some H2 receptor antagonist was there, but now we have PPIs, protein pump inhibitors. So like omeprazole or rabiprazole, they are fantastic. These PPIs are absolutely fantastic. But what they precipitate is achlorhydria. And what do you need for protein digestion? Acid. So if you increase your protein digestion, you're having a PPI or you have gastritis and you're taking some antacids, your protein digestion is just going to go south. It's just not going to happen. Because for pepsin to work on the enzyme, pepsin enzyme to work on proteins, you need acid. You need an acidic media, 3 to 5, say 2 to 5, pH 2 to 5. Sorry, 2 to 3 or 2 to 4. 5 would be more alkaline side.
When you have time, can
Yes,
you
doc.
post a diet for a 60 kg vegetarian person?
Okay.
What should be there in his diet from morning to night? It's not now I'm saying. Whenever
Sure.
you have time, you can
Sure,
post
doc.
it in the group.
Sure.
What should be the ideal breakfast? What should be his ideal lunch? What should be his ideal dinner?
Right.
So
60 kg vegetarian, doc?
Yeah, because most of our food in Indian food, breakfast, we have poha, we have upma,
Right.
we have idli, we have dosa,
Right.
paratha,
Right.
and I think they don't have enough proteins. Same
They
thing
don't.
for lunch,
Right,
so
doc.
something which an ideal vegetarian diet.
Right. So
should
I'll
have.
just rattle off right now. I normally put them on sprouts, early morning sprouts, which is soaked overnight. So sprouts, lot of sprouts, a big fistful of sprouts, as much they can eat. Make it with good fat, because that's very important to start the day. Some people, especially people who are breakfast people, that's an important thing. I asked them to put mixed vegetables and make a nice burji, or if they're lacto vegetarians, to put in about 50 grams of paneer there. That's a good one to start with. And if they really insist on having poha and upma, I'll tell them, okay, make it 25% poha and 60 to 70% vegetables, because otherwise the carbohydrate level goes up. So or for a break they can do that, or they can have a dosa, for example, a thin dosa with paneer stuffed inside, or with sprouts, nice sauteed sprouts inside. That's a breakfast item. Then lunch would be thick dal, or at least 200 grams of protein. Thick dal is very thick dal. चम्मच से नहीं निकालना है, that kind of thick dal, at least 2 wati, or paneer with 1 roti or 2 rotis. Again, I try to skip wheat in most of my patients, or rice, 1 wati rice. There's nothing wrong with rice. In fact, it digests pretty well. That's coming from a South Indian. And then evening, I don't give anything unless they really want, they're hungry or SOS, because eating 3 to 4 meals a day actually doesn't make sense. But evening, in case they need something, it would be nuts, not dry fruit. Dry fruit would be like kishmish and dates. Nuts would be walnuts and macadamia nuts and pecan and almonds. So these are the 4 nuts that I prescribe, because they're nice and fatty and give good protein as well. And dinner would be as little carbohydrate as possible, with again paneer and dal, or if it's a female patient, then maybe a little bit of soya. I don't give soya that much to male patients unless really they don't have a choice because of phytoestrogens, or they can have a little bit of tofu, because tofu is pre-digested, because many people cannot digest protein, soya protein that much. So that'll be a regular thing, doc.
Doc, what is the difference between tofu and the soya?
Tofu is fermented.
But phytoestrogen?
They do have phytoestrogens, but not as much. But they do have phytoestrogens, unfortunately. So soya is not my go-to protein. So whenever I look at a protein supplement, I try to get my patients at least, not to buy the ones with soya. But the worst part, doc, is not we adults. Our children, food, baby powders and all have soya. And they are going in a wrong direction. That is the saddest part, I think.
The government has banned the baby foods and all, no?
Yes, doc. But soya is still there, no, doc? As a protein source.
But if we don't advertise, they will not buy.
Do that.
Yeah. And somebody asked that you did not mention curd in any diet,
Curd. Okay. Curd, yeah, I mean, curd is a good source of protein. About 100 grams has about 8 grams of protein. I certainly recommend protein, especially for vegetarians. And actually, curd rice, what South Indians have, the South Indian way, you ferment it overnight, is also a good source of pretty good source of protein. Also good for your gut flora because it gives you good lactobacillus and bulgaricus, which are very important to replenish your gut flora. I normally avoid curds or yogurt at night because many people complain of congestion in the morning if they have curds at night. So afternoon curds not a problem. Or chas after say 4 o'clock in the evening they want to have something, chas is fine. But yeah, curds is an important part.
Doctor, what about the groundnuts, roasted groundnuts and the chana?
Right,
how
sir.
can we put instead of the sprouted, suppose that is
right. Chana and Kabuli chana and all of these had a good source, about 25 grams to 28 to 30 grams of protein. Yes, sir. But they have about 50 to 60% carbs.
Okay.
So to have, if you have a lot of them, it's a problem. But if you have a fistful, that's fine. But I know but the only thing is that groundnuts and peanuts are very easy to find. That's the advantage, and so people reach out for them. So I say, okay, cut down on them. They are better than eating suka bale or something. But yes, a fistful. But if you can carry something like walnuts or almonds, or even better, pecan or macadamia. Macadamia is a little expensive, but these nuts are brilliant, absolutely brilliant.